Good evening and welcome to the Monday, August 8th Maplewood City Council Manager Workshop. Tonight, I don't normally start with an announcement, but this is important, so I'm going to read it prior to our workshop and then also once again before our council meeting. This is an announcement from St. Paul Regional Water Services about a boil water advisory. And this happened later on this afternoon. St. Paul Regional Water Services has issued a boil water advisory for the area served by the Beebe Road pump station. Earlier today, the pump went down due to an XL Energy outage. This caused low water pressure. The pump is back up and running, and a water boil advisory was issued as standard precaution. It is unlikely, but there is a chance that contaminants entered the distribution system due to the loss of water pressure. Customers in the affected areas in Maplewood and St. Paul are being asked to boil water for 3 minutes before using it for cooking, drinking, or brushing your teeth, or use bottled water. This boil advisory will be in effect until at least noon tomorrow. There's no evidence that contamination has entered the distribution system. St. Paul Regional Water Service will conduct several more water sample tests before lifting the water boil advisory. Areas that are affected are generally bounded by Holloway Avenue in the north to Conway in the south. The northern part runs from 7th Avenue East and Division Street over to Century, and further south from McKnight to Century. For a full impact map, please go to the Maplewood City website for more information, and you can see the map of the affected homes and businesses. So with that, let's move on and let's do our roll call for tonight's workshop. City Manager Coleman.
Thank you. Councilmember Cave.
Here.
Councilmember Juniman.
Here.
Councilmember Villavicencio.
Here.
Councilmember Knutson.
Here.
Mayor Abrams.
I'm here as well. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Moved by Knutson, seconded by Cave. The motion to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We have no unfinished business. We have new business, 2 items tonight. We're going to start with the City Council Budget Workshop, and then we have a report on the Single Family Rehabilitation Program, a presentation from the University of Minnesota. So let us start with the City Council Budget Workshop, and I'm going to ask City Manager Coleman if she would kind of tee this up for us. Okay. I think it'll help everyone to kind of understand what the whole process is in developing the budget.
Thank you, Mayor Abrams, members of the City Council. This isn't the first budget for everybody, so that's good. You had some of the newer members have been at this before, so that's good. The one thing that I wanted to just focus on is just a reminder that the City Council has to adopt a budget by December 30th. And we are also required to do a preliminary budget by September 30th. And so what we're working towards tonight is that first step towards doing the preliminary levy in September. One of the things that we have to remember is that when we set the preliminary number that is set, we can go down to December, but we can't go back up. So once we set a number, that's it. You can go down, but you can't go back up. So remember that tonight in context for the conversation. A detailed proposal document has been prepared by Ms. Paulseth and her staff, and it describes our proposed budget and tax levy. Although we're giving sort of a range this evening, and I'd like to just talk about that for a minute. One of the reasons that we're giving you a range tonight is because we still have some information that we don't have that will be very important to put into our budget. And those items are the comprehensive pay plan, and we're going to have those explained to you at a future workshop. And if you read the FYI, I did ask that we do that on August 29th. Because we'll have more information then, and I think that will help you make a little bit more informed decisions as we move forward. The other thing that we're waiting on is our health insurance premium increases. We did get some numbers from our we went out for bid, and the numbers ranged from 23% increase to 4% increase. And the 4% plan, I don't think we'd be able to do. And our NFP, our consultants on this, are going back and trying to get that number down, and I believe that we will. And Ms. Paulson also believes that we're going to get that down. But whether it's 15% or 10% or something else, we don't know yet. We're obviously hoping for something under 10, would be really great. And then the last thing, we're waiting on the Ramsey County's market valuations. And it seems like they get later and later every year as to when they provide that information. And, that really tells us about the economic growth in the county and our community. And that sets us up for impact to our tax rates, to our residents. So those three things are really factors that Ellie's made some really good attempts to try to put some reasonable numbers in and plug those in, and she's going to explain that in her presentation. But I think that's really what we're trying to do tonight, is kind of keep it high level and give you a range. And then we'll be happy to answer questions that you have. But that's I just want to give you a little heads up about what Ellie's doing. She's kind of making some educated guesses, so to speak, on those three items in particular. But I think we have a good range for you to consider, and we will be working on that in the next couple weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Paulseth?
Thank you. Is this on? Everyone can hear me? As most of you have heard, I'm just starting my final budget session for the city of Maplewood, retiring the end of this year. So it's mixed feelings about that, but I will be retiring December 31st, so this will be my final budget. I've spent 41 years. I started out while I was still in college in local government, and out of those 41 years, over maybe 32 of them were at the director level. So I've spent a lot of years shepherding budget processes, so it's going to feel a little bit strange not doing that. As I said, it's mixed feelings, but as finance people, we think in terms of cycles, and my retirement date was chosen specifically for this reason, to make sure that I could continue to get this budget process shepherded through this year, and you will have a much easier time finding candidates who are much more familiar with putting together a financial statement than you will those that have budget experience. So it was important to me to end it at the end of a budget cycle rather than a financial statement cycle. So
We really appreciate your thoughtfulness on that. We're going to miss you. I wouldn't say that we have mixed feelings. It's more of a dread, but we do appreciate your thoughtfulness on that.
I am completely committed to giving 100% until the end of the year, and to helping out in this process in any way that I can, and in continuing to set up the city for success after I leave. I do believe that you will have a number of good candidates. I already know of 4 that are interested that I think would be a very good fit. So I do think you won't miss me for very long, unfortunately, but maybe you'll think of me every now and then. But I do think you'll have a good turnout for candidates, and I'm certainly it's a very important position, and I want to be available for help in the transition in any way that I can.
Thank you.
So tonight we're going to talk about maybe a difficult budget process, and maybe not. And one of the reasons I say that is because of with all the work that we've done together over the last several years, we have a lot of flexibility built into our policies and procedures and right into our budget. So I'll walk through that a little bit one by one. Not only do we have extremely high fund balance at this point in time, I'm also expecting a surplus in 2022. So if you have any fears about that, we are sitting in really good shape. And I will walk through that piece by piece with you. So some of you have seen some of these slides many times. I might change them up a little bit, but a lot of it is kept the same for a reason. And it's not to bore you. It is so that you get used to seeing some of the same information. It helps increase the transparency if you can if you can view that information in the same context that you're used to seeing it. And I find that after county commissioners and city council members have seen a process for a couple of 3 years, they get it. You know, they're ready to go, but it really takes some time. And so I try to simplify it and keep things the same. Again, not to bore you, but so tonight we'll talk about high level, the preliminary budget. We always pretty much keep it at high level because that's where you're best, is at the policy level. We'll talk a little bit about what challenges we're facing, about the surplus and how that may or may not play, and then a timeline and those very important policies and how they have helped us in this process. The strategic priorities have not changed. We talk about this every time, but I do want to mention that we're mostly focusing on the financial and asset management. The good financial management policies and procedures drive everything else that's on this list. We could not operate without good financial management. So we talked a little bit at a workshop maybe a month ago, and we said, you know, we could be looking at maybe 7%, and we know that this is a bad time for you to hear that kind of news. So we sharpened our pencils as best we could. I will walk through some of the assumptions with you. What we're presenting is a 6.2. We have options where you could go to a 5, a 6, or a 7. And we can probably accommodate any of those. But I think what we'd be recommending would be a 6.2. We are open to hearing what you have to say. We know that you get blamed for this when you're out in the community, so we're very sensitive to that. Most of the increase that the homeowners are going to see is going to be as a result of the increase in their market value, but you're still going to hear about it, and they're still going to relate that to you. So we understand that, and we try to keep things, I think, as conservative as possible. When you look at the tax levy history, I went back to 2007, and I could not find anything over 5%. That was the largest, so Maplewood has done an excellent job of keeping things conservative. There are extra things to consider this year. But again, we will work with you on this. So 6.2%, the largest that probably ever. I shouldn't say ever because I didn't go back that far, but it's large for Maplewood. You've done a very good job. The one thing that I will say is I don't like to see zeros because that usually sets up for an increase in the next year. And I don't like to see over 5 because it can be challenging in a community that can't afford it. But in this case, you know, I think 6 is justifiable. So how did it change? We're going to just keep going back to this a little bit. So the levy, I'm going to go back once. As you can see here, the levy is increasing 1.5 million at the 6.2% level. If you increased it to 7%, that would be 1.7 million. It just gives you a high-level idea of how much money you're working with. So to put that into context, last year's 5% increase was 1.1 million. So you're seeing a little under 400,000 more built into the capacity, the levy this year. So most of this 1.5 million can be attributed to general fund payroll increases. And I'm saying general fund because the enterprise funds don't enter into the tax levy. That's part of the fee schedule, so we're basically talking about operations here. So we're not talking about the entire payroll hitting the tax levy. We're only talking about the general fund portion hitting the tax levy. So I want to go through this slide and then walk through the deeper assumptions that play into this. And maybe normally wouldn't do that, but I think it's important to make sure that you understand where things are coming from. So with 1.4 million being largely payroll, we're anticipating that you're going to see at least a 3% general adjustment or cost of living request from the unions, maybe more. So we have that built in, and then also another 3% to cover pay equity increases. We'll talk about that on the next slide. So I want you to just drop down a little bit to the red numbers where it says decrease in debt service. So now we're getting down into the things that make the tax levy, that reduce the tax levy. The numbers in black would increase the tax levy. So the debt service stepped down this year, as I've been saying that it would, about $120,000. I always recommend that you, rather than folding that into operations, that you use that capacity and put it back into capital so that we can ensure that our capital funds are well-funded and do not have to borrow for equipment or building improvements. The capital fund that I think probably needs it the most is the building fund. So we folded some of the 120, not 100% of it, but most of it, into the capital funds. The MCC capital fund, that's set by contract, so that's why that looks like an odd number. That's the amount that's set by contract. We also are seeing increases in, we fund a playground every year through our one of our capital funds. That's not the park fund, but another capital fund. We're seeing increases in that and seeing increases in our public safety radio costs. So we're pushing some more into the capital funds rather than into operations. That's some flexibility for you, that you have the ability, if you really don't want to see the levy at 6.2%, you have that ability to move some of that capital money somewhere else into operations, and then try to change your strategy next year. That's not what I would recommend, and it's not what's in our policy, but you have the flexibility to do that. So other than that, there was an increase in commodities like road salt and asphalt. We're kind of stuck with that. That's just the story right now. I wanted to go a little bit into the increase in contracted services because that looks like a big number, $231,000. So I want to point out before we continue that about close to 120 of that is for the county social worker contract that is being paid for through ARPA funding. So it shows up as an increase in the budget, but we actually have ARPA funding built in to pay for that for the next 4 years. So just to point out that it's not, it looks like an increase in the budget because it is, but it's not an unfunded one. So 120 of that, about 68,000 was due to an increase in fleet charges. I won't go into the complexities of how the internal service fleet fund impacts the general fund, but there's a charge for maintaining the public works fleet, replacing the public works fleet with the pricing that we're seeing, with the cost of maintenance increasing, the maintenance supplies increasing, the fleet charges are what we're really seeing. Normally, I would not increase fleet charges by 10%, but we really found a need to the last 2 years because we're not keeping up with inflation on those things. And it's important to have the fleet in good shape. Utilities, we're seeing pricing increasing on utilities, so we're anticipating 32,000 increase in utilities. And we are also going to be doing another citizen survey, and that was about 8,000. So that's approximately the explanation for that line item, for that category. There are some other revenues that are offsetting, and the use of ARPA reserves. We're using 100,000 to offset the 120. I think it's actually 116. But social worker contract, we can increase that and use the whole 120. I'm just trying to build more flexibility into the budget. As you can see, if we stay very high level, we can do that. So we have the ability to do that. You also have the ability to fund that social worker 100% and build that in, and then you'd have it there. Again, that would bring you up to your 7%. So I know that's a lot. Should I go to the next slide and start explaining further, deeper, before the questions? Okay. So as I mentioned, we're kind of assuming a 3% general pay adjustments. I've heard of some 3.5%, so I don't know what we're going to end up with there. I think we have a good argument with the labor groups that almost everyone will be getting some sort of adjustment in addition to the general pay adjustment. So I think we have, a good story to tell them. and hopefully the contracts can be limited to that. So we've also included market adjustments. Now, I have some really, really rough numbers because I had to change all my slides, but the 500,000 is probably overstated. It's probably close to 400 if we're talking about general adjustments for the general fund. Market adjustments, that assumption was simply that half the employees would get a 6% market adjustment. So the important thing to remember about these market adjustments is that no employee will get all of their adjustment at once. The city has control. It's generally spaced over, 5 to 6 to 7 even years. I've even seen more, but generally not less than 5. And it's usually around 4%. That seems to be any more than that, and the communities have a little bit more difficulty affording that. So the city really has the flexibility in determining how fast to roll those raises out or those increases out. So it's not really too much of an unknown at this point. It will probably look a little different than this assumption. It may be that all employees will see somewhere between 2 and 4%, depending on how far off. But given the nature of how we process payroll and how we budget for payroll, I'm comfortable with a 6% market adjustment or a 6% overall adjustment on payroll, given the trends, given the experience that I've had in implementing these and everywhere else that I've worked. I also want to say that not all of the payroll hits the general fund, therefore does not impact the levy. So some of this is picked up by other funds. So I think that I'm comfortable that a 6.2 will handle what we need to handle. If you're not comfortable, we can always raise that. Health insurance, as the city manager mentioned, we're required by law to go out for bid every 5 years. That's a requirement. Been through a number of these. Seeing something like 17% or something like that from Medica, very much expected. They do that all the time. They have nothing to lose because under the law, they get to come back because they're the current provider. They get to come back and meet or have the opportunity to meet the low bid. They will more than likely do that. So I think somewhere we're going to probably be somewhere in between 4 and 5% when we get through with it. In my mind, it's not that big of it doesn't really impact the budget that much because we don't budget that way for it. We budget about a 5% increase every year. And here's the reason. We do that to keep it steady. We have had to go higher to play some catch up, depending on what kind of shenanigans we're seeing in the market that year. Part of the reason that I'm not too concerned about it, I want to say to start off with, we have a 15% increase included in this budget. All of our insurance runs through the Employee Benefits Fund. So that is a fund that is separate from the general fund. Currently, we have about $2.5 million in that fund. That fund exists to fund employee benefits. It's an internal service fund, so I don't want to imply that it doesn't impact the tax levy just because it's an internal service fund. There are internal charges that are charged against the general fund that compensate to some degree, but the Employee Benefits Fund takes that shock. So if there is an increase that is unexpected, I will have to say that most cities of our size and larger are using this method. So it does seem somewhat not as transparent. That's one of the first things that you might say about it because it's not so direct. But if you're a good finance director, you'll have a graveyard of buried cash. And I have to say that Dan Faust is the one who set this up, and it was probably modeled after St. Paul. But I think it has served the city well. It's overfunded. It was way overfunded when I came here. We made some adjustments because we were seeing we were seeing some negative impacts on the general fund. So without going into detail about that, we made those adjustments. We did also, when we had a lot of tenured police officers taken to retirement at once, we saw a heavy hit on some of those funds, and so we covered that with ARPA, or with surplus from ARPA. So this fund exists to pay off all of the leave liabilities. So anytime that someone leaves the city and has a bank of PTO and gets a payoff, it will come out of this fund. So the total leave liabilities for the city right now are between 1.9 and 2 million. So if every employee in the city quit right now and we had to pay them off, we could do that. So that's what I mean by how it's funded. It's overfunded. We have about 2.5 million. So the other purpose that the Employee Benefits Fund serves is for the rate shock in some of the health and other insurances. Workers' comp runs through there, unemployment, it all runs through there. And we use assumptions every year because the rates are never set by the time that we're standing in front of you at this time. And we make an attempt to try to keep it as steady as possible. We have had to go higher than 5 because some years the Employee Benefits Fund wins this game and some years it doesn't, depending on whether the rates go up and down or more than our assumptions or whatever. But we constantly are monitoring it. So having said that again, I will say that 15% is built in to this levy. Now, always a good idea to be more cautious because next year, if it's Medica or if it's Health Partners, whoever gets the bid, they're going to come back and they're going to try and increase again. So what we did the last time was we put a 10% cap in the contract, and hopefully, we'll be able to accomplish that again this year. Again, overall, I don't want to belabor this so much. Health insurance costs in total, general fund health insurance costs are less than 3% of the levy. So it's not going to move the needle much. Whatever happens to this, it doesn't move the needle much. Payroll costs, wages, yes, that does. So keeping that in mind, and I know I have 300,000 there, but these were just very rounded off numbers. It's really closer to a little over 200 is probably what the total increase would be if it was 15. So moving down, there are 3 new firefighters built into the budget. I want to stress, though, that it really is more like 1.5. So all 3 FTEs are built in, but one will start on 1/1, one on 7/1, and one on 12/31. So that eases the pain. It will be 1.5 this year, 1.5 next year. That's the equivalent of what you'd be actually seeing. So that is in this budget. There's also a new police records clerk. So that is actually a duplicate position. There's already a position. I won't go into the details, but it involves, a leave situation. So you actually have that position in there twice. Again, if you're concerned, I would leave it in there because then that gives you that extra buffer for wages. And it also creates that capacity to fund those additional 1.5 firefighters for next year. So again, it's all up to you. It's what you want the number to be this year and what your constituents are going to be comfortable with. I also want to point out that we had savings. We had over $200,000 in savings from the COVID staff that we had with the DMV. They were paid with ARPA funding, but we built them into the budget for the simple reason that we did not know the future, and we expected that there might be a possibility that they would be staying on and ARPA funding would run out. They're no longer here, but that capacity is built into the budget, and that took up a lot of slack for some of these other positions. So talking about a total payroll and benefits of about $24 million, about 76% of that is the general fund. To break that down a little bit more, and I understand that a lot of this you're probably having a hard time listening to me. A lot of this is not written out on the slides, and it was just because of running out of time with a lot of last-minute changes. But So we're looking at a total increase of 2023, and it sounds like a lot, but it's a net increase of 4.3. And what that means is we added, and I will explain this, 6.7 positions, and then decreased 2.4. So the 2.4 decrease came out of the DMV. So the 2.4 positions, so the 2 full-time positions plus a portion of a part-time position was taken out of the DMV budget. And the 6.7 are this. So fire, 3 FTEs, you know about those. Again, I told you that the impact will be like 1.5, but all 3 of the positions are built in. But the impact will be like 1.5 for this year because of how we're staggering the start. The CSOs are going from part-time. We've reduced the number of CSOs, but they're going from part-time to full-time, and that made 1.15 difference in the FTEs. Basically for more efficient use of those positions in assisting the police officers, especially when they're down so many officers. So then the records clerk position of 1.0 FTE, again, that's one that we have in duplicate there, so we have some flexibility there. And one of the admin staff was increased 0.20. So that's a total of 5.35, so that's the real increase minus, the 2.4. However, the number in 2023 includes 1.35 full-time equivalencies in temporary positions. Now, those were never counted before. Those were just lumped in as a lump sum, and just were never counted as employees, but our new system counts them. So I've included them. Not sure if I should have done that or not, but to keep it transparent, I want to explain that 1.35 of that won't relate to the prior years because so essentially 5.35 increase and 2.4 decrease in positions compared to last year. So overall, what we're looking at is a recommendation of 6.2 in that area. If you're looking for places to cut, we can find that for you. If you want to increase, we can certainly find that for you as well. We already talked pretty much about all of this. The one thing I want to say down at the bottom, the potential shift to residential properties. Now, I will say that Ramsey County usually doesn't get us this information until the 17th or the 18th of August. So we never really know it until our second meeting, and then we just barely have it in our hands. I expect that there will be a big increase in the market value. Why? Because we've all seen the value of our homes increase dramatically. So I think we're going to see that. How that will play out in the budget process is more than likely a shift to residential properties. More than likely, the city's tax rate will go down because your levy increase is not going to be more than that dramatic increase that the inflationary increase that people are going to see in their home values. So that would be my prediction, that it's a shift to residential properties. We also don't know the potential of tax petitions because we never see that until the very end of the year. We don't get those numbers. I want to say something about Ramsey County is that they are working through a new property tax system with new employees. I will say that what we are seeing has been delayed in a number of instances, but what we are seeing is much better products coming out of the department with all of the changes. So I think that's a good sign. So the council then has some things to think about, whether you want to decrease the levy, reduce an FTE. We do have an extra one in there. Again, not sure I would do that, but certainly your choice. We can reduce that building fund increase and roll some of that debt savings back into operations. Not always recommended, certainly can do it. We always have the option of changing some things up again next year. You can also decide to fund the social worker right out of taxpayers' money if you want. That way you know in 2024, it's in there. So just a lot of different options. We have a lot of flexibility built in, not only with our employee benefits fund, but with our other internal service funds, our fleet fund, and also our enterprise funds. They're very well positioned. We have to watch the EUF fund now and then for rate increases because there's a lot of pressure on that. The sewer fund's in excellent condition. So we're in a really good place. I want to step back just a little bit and talk about one item that I missed, and that was the general fund surplus. Again, I said that I expected that we would see a surplus again in 2022. I don't know what slide I had that on, but over the last 5 years, and maybe even in selected years before that, we've been seeing anywhere from 400,000 to $1.5 million in operational surpluses. So part of the reason that we have about a 78%, I guess I don't have that slide on there. I didn't have time to update it. Part of the reason that we're seeing that we have about a 78 or 79% fund balance ratio. Recall that 50% is our desired and at the top of our policy limitations because we need to pay bills for half of the year. So we keep 50%. So right now we're at a fund balance of about 79, and that is because of those surpluses that have been building plus the federal money. So we did talk in March, and we will be waiting till after all of this is over with, but you have approximately $2.5 million in surplus over and above your policy requirements, the top level of your policy requirements. So in March, we talked about allocating maybe some of that to the EDA, to the Park Development Fund for the Hazelwood Park, so we didn't have to borrow money for that. So we do still have that surplus in the general fund, and we will still have that conversation. And the conversation at the time was that you would maybe think about 1.5 million of that, allocating that out. That still leaves you $1 million over what the top of your. The point is that you're just in very good shape. I mean, it's not that we like to see deficits, but we're going to see another surplus this year. I can just, with building permits, what we've done so far year to date, and with the vacancies that we've seen in the departments, we're just going to see another fairly large surplus. So keep that in mind, that that's also available, that this year's surplus is also available to be put to use for operations. So I'm going to go back one. This is the timeline, or at least it was. August 22nd is your next meeting. That was the original. I'm not sure where that's going to land now, but by September 12th is when you make the. So the process does have to go forward because you do have to certify this to the county by law, and then in December, then you'll have the truth and taxation hearing and the final adoptions. So
I believe, can we go back to that one? I believe that the August 22nd date, that's now going to be a special meeting on August 29th.
Yes, that's
okay.
what
So
I was
that'll be our
saying.
number
I think
2
that it
budget
got
workshop.
moved. So we can certainly be prepared for August 22nd. We can do both days, as much as you need. That's totally up to you. Every place else I've ever worked, I have had a city council finance committee that we worked with. And the city administrator and I would get into a little deeper details because it just gets to be a lot. I think I've put most of you to sleep already. It just gets to be a lot to do in a budget workshop. We don't have that here, but it's always something that you can consider. We have Councilmember Juniman and Mayor Abrams act as the audit committee. In other cities that I've worked, they would also act as the finance committee.
We do have some questions right now. Councilmember Juniman.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is maybe more a policy question, but I thought we could think about it and then discuss it at some point. Is there any reason not to build in the social worker salaries into the budget down the line?
City Manager Coleman, do you want to respond to that? and then we'll ask.
Yeah, I think Ms. Paulson has addressed that, and there's no reason we can't. I think it's just in the mix of where we see with these other 3 outstanding items and how that all works out. And then that's totally fair game to do that.
Yeah.
Because the funds are there.
And, my reason for asking and talking about considering it is we want it to be a stabilized position that isn't at the whim of whether there's enough or not,
Right.
Madam
You know,
Mayor and
because
council,
we committed to it.
I was part of the negotiations in getting that position. We were told at the time by the department head or supervisor that we were negotiating with that they would, by 2024, expected that they would be funding the position. I wouldn't take that to the bank, you know.
I consider the source, and no, I don't.
Yeah.
So, I would personally, because you can always use that capacity for another position that will eventually be needed. So I would work towards that. It doesn't necessarily need to be this year because you've got so much on your plate this year.
Thank you for that. And we all know what an important position that is. Councilmember Knutson, you're next, and then Councilmember Villavicencio.
Thank you, Mayor. I just got some general observations and questions. What percent of our total expenses is labor?
Yeah, so when you say expenses, do you mean expenses or levy?
Expenses, that
Okay,
is, yeah.
so
Just generally, I mean.
if you're talking government-wide, it's a lot less number. The general fund, the operational fund, about 76%.
So on this page of payroll increases, I mean, there's a lot on here, and we're a little uncertain about the totality of everything on this page, it seems like.
And we always are.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, the point I was trying to make is we always do operate on assumptions
Yeah,
and.
yeah. But some of it is kind of fungible. In other words, there are
Yeah.
some things that we have to do. And
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we have some of the guardrails in place that we do is because it's a big enough payroll and, a big enough tax levy.
But, for instance, on this records clerk, that it's an extended leave, I'm assuming, we're paying for that. In other words, it's like a
Yes.
internal insurance,
Yes.
whether it's, whatever the reason is.
Yes.
Like sick came is all internal insurance, so I'm trying to figure out
Likely,
why.
the situation will resolve itself, but I don't know.
Okay.
And that would be another position there or another 80,000 or whatever the number was that can be used for
And
other
then the
purposes.
DMV is a bonus or an opportunity for us, right?
Yeah.
Out of this whole page.
That helped out. That's really one of the biggest reasons why we were able to keep, because that gave us almost 1%. Well, probably 1% right there.
So you have some discretion on this page. but
Yeah.
Generally speaking, it's comfortable. At the, is this funded at 6.2%?
6.2%
Okay.
funds, including.
So you would say the 5% is a little shaky, risky.
Then, Madam Mayor and Council, then we would have to start looking at pulling some of these things away,
Okay.
pulling that extra
Okay,
position
that's-
out of the budget, pulling that $75,000 addition to the building fund. Those are the kinds of things that would go away. And again, it's your decision. It's your constituents. It's, you have to answer
No,
to
sure,
them, so.
certainly. And the property value question would just give us that range between capacity and what we want to do, right? I mean, it doesn't really affect us that much, right?
Yeah,
It's
so,
interesting, but.
I think residential, to be honest with you, there's whatever you might do, if you lower this recommendation, if you lower it 1%, maybe that gives you something to tell your constituents, we're trying everything we can to
Yeah.
help you, but overall, it's going to do so little,
But it
because
doesn't put cash in people's pocket to
really
have a higher
doesn't.
home value.
Not when, compared to
that's
what
what I
they're
mean,
going to be
so.
seeing for home values, and you're taking the hit for that.
So all of this is really what matters, not so much.
Yeah, it's like, what do you want the number to be? What can you justify to your constituents? And what do you think is the best thing for
Yeah,
the city? How do you balance all of that? And when we present you these recommendations, we're trying to balance all of that. We totally understand your position, and we totally understand, what the city needs as well, and we're trying to make those,
And the surplus, well, we went through and allocated our thinking on the surplus, and that's expended, right? I mean, that's committed.
So we haven't done that yet.
Oh, okay.
The 1.5 million, we did it once. We did
Yeah, no, I
1.5
get that.
million in January, and we have another 1.5 million, and we will still have a million, probably 1.5 million left after that. So once we get through all of this and figure out where we're at, we'll bring that surplus discussion back to the table. And that's when we were talking about the EDA and the parks and whatever. We did do, in January, we did do a number of capital funds, $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And so we have that, we do have to carry that forward. We don't want the state auditor looking too closely at our fund balances or the legislative auditor, because historically what they do is they go to the legislature and they say, these cities have too much money.
Plenty,
We don't think we should be paying them local government aid, That's what happens. So whenever we have fund balance, we try to put it where it's needed or commit it for a certain purpose, like we committed it for a fire station.
Thank you.
So we will be.
I think it's incumbent on us to do a really good job looking at this. It's a tough year for everybody, and
It
I
is.
One of the-
appreciate the information. I would really, I will be willing to look at more detail, so. Thank you.
Councilmember Villavicencio.
Thank you. Thanks, Ellen. I just want to say your attention to detail, even though it's high level, is very much appreciated. And when I read the packet, it reminded me that you were leaving, and I know that we will all miss you, but you've set us up so well that I think we'll be in good hands. So I really appreciate all the hard work you have done for the city. The question that I had is about the petitions, the tax petitions. Do you have any idea, like, how much that would be based on, like, past years or any?
Yeah, Councilmember, Mayor Abrams and Council. It has been anywhere between 250 and 750. And it tends to jump around a bit depending on who's filing petition. There are a number of petitions working through the court system right now, but we won't know until really the end of the year how it's going to hit us. So we usually prepare for about 250 to 300,000. So this budget doesn't reflect any additional preparation for that, simply because of the surplus that we have and the surplus that we expect this year. So that is another consideration, is that we're not budgeting for an above the average petition year. And we may not, I mean, we tend to look at trends and we budget for the average, not for instance, building permits. We don't budget for what we've been taking in the last couple of years because that's going to end. And so we try to budget those revenues conservatively and budget for the average, and we do the same thing for most of our expenses. I did want to say, though, there's just been a lot of attention. There's a new young reporter at the Star Tribune, and she did an article on gas prices, and I turned on Channel 2 the other night, and Michael Thompson was on being interviewed about gas prices. So there's a lot of attention being paid to it, but just so that you know that the city's in pretty good shape there. We never really did lower our budget much when things went down the last few years. So we have that built in. We've had a surplus in our gas budget for the last several years. So we have a master fuel contract, and the prices are nothing like what you would pay at the pump. So what we're paying right now for gas with our contract is $2.80 a gallon. So that's what the city pays for gas. And that contract, we won't know what that's going to be until I think it's October, end of October maybe. So we always are guessing on that as well. And we tend, because of the volatility of fuel, and again, this is less than 0.5% of the levy, but we try to keep that one. That's one we don't really, we don't look at the trends on that. Or I shouldn't say we look at the trends, but we don't go by averages. We try to keep that up. And I think our budget, in this budget, includes about $4 a gallon for gas. And so I think we've got it covered.
Okay. Councilmember Cave.
Just a couple comments. Thank you again, Ellie, for all the work you do. Our city is very healthy and strong, and a lot of that is to you. And so I feel like this is the beginning of our budget process. I know the city manager mentioned the comp. plan and health insurance are two big things that I'm looking forward to, getting that a little more solidified before we go further into the process. But so far, you did a great presentation, and it's very clear, and I, hope the citizens of Maplewood see that also, what a great job this city is doing internally and all the things that we do for our citizens. So thank you.
Thank you.
And just one final point. I am glad to hear that Ramsey County is using a different system, and I know that there was some delay last year during our budget season, because there were so many people that had left, retired, and so I'm encouraged by that. How confident are we that we are going to get the market evaluations by August 17th or 18th?
Last year they weren't too late. What they were late on was with very much a lot of detail, Councilmember and Mayor. So I do expect that we're going to get something, but probably not as much detail as we had been used to in the past. But they are improving the quality of the reports. We're able to, we used to get very, very raw data and had to really sort through things to make sense of it. And we're seeing a lot more concise reporting and accurate reporting. So I'm confident that we're going to get some good numbers from them.
Good, because I know that from a council's perspective, we want to know what's going to be the impact on each of our residents in terms of the value of their homes and what the projected levy increase what the impact would be on them. Recognizing that, no doubt, Ramsey County is also going to be increasing their levy. The school district, I believe, is talking about an IT levy, and so we're going to have a lot of information coming at us pretty quickly. But I really am looking forward to having that information about the impact on our residents. So thank you very much, council members. I don't see any more lights. Anything else, Ms. Paulseth?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered it all, and I just would like to, council members, I would like to know if you're comfortable with the 6.2. There's a lot of work to preparing for the next meeting and to getting those details. I'm speaking at you pretty high level right now. This is more details usually than I throw at you because I know how hard it is to listen to.
Sure.
But
from our perspective, I mean, this is the first budget workshop. We'll have many more. I think that we will have more information when we have our special meeting on the 29th, that will help to start solidifying this. I mean, I don't think any of this surprised anyone. At least I didn't hear any surprises. We all kind of know what's happening. So I think that we'll know more when we can get more numbers on it, and I think that will be helpful for the 29th. So.
Yeah, but as a general taking
I
your
don't think
temperature.
anyone's surprised. I mean, I like looking at a range because right now, otherwise it feels a little bit to me like we're throwing darts, because we don't have all of the information. So I think that we want more information, and we'll have that on the 29th. City Manager Coleman.
Mayor, members of the council, I would also just add that I think the week prior to the 29th, we will be assembling that information. We'll have it in pretty good shape to give you a ballpark about that impact to the information that you received for tonight. So Ellie will have time to sort of do some projections before we get to that meeting on the 29th with you. And if we need to, we can have a meeting the first week of September as well.
Right.
So that we have a chance to talk about it before we go for the levy.
Yeah, we have until the end of September. So I think our timing is really good. So, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Council members, we have one more agenda item, and that is the single-family rehabilitation program. Mr. Thompson, do you want to set this up for us, please?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll just do a very quick overview. We do have the graduate students here tonight from the University of Minnesota. I know you're well aware that we are partnering with the University of Minnesota through their Resilient Communities Project on a study of this potential housing program in Maplewood. Just the nature of working with the university is it's based on the academic calendar, and so the work we're not able to kind of see the work through and then do a final report. So we had the one student group present their findings in their final report back in May. This student group has done an excellent job of picking that report up and then going into a deeper dive and more analysis around some of the potential program opportunities that exist in Maplewood. So I will introduce them. They do have a presentation tonight. They will actually introduce themselves individually so you know who they are. But they've been studying in this summer semester course at the university. So with that, I'll pull up the presentation and then I will turn it over to the students.
Thank you. That one, perfect. Thanks so much.
Good evening and welcome to our council meeting tonight. Please make sure and introduce yourself.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Nora Vonnegut, and my colleagues Kate, Abdi, Guy, and I are students at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs over at the University of Minnesota. And for the past few months, we've had the opportunity to work with a few members at Maplewood and also the Met Council on the beginning stages of the single-family housing rehabilitation project. We politely ask that if you have any notes during our presentation, you take them down, and we will have time for questions following the presentation. So today we'll cover several topics. For background context, we will share specifically what opportunity our group has been addressing. As Jeff mentioned, we are following a spring capstone group, and so we will also share some of their findings and key takeaways that helped us develop our areas of focus. From there, we will go into our methodology that we used to help reach our ultimate recommendation for the city of Maplewood. Additionally, we will share an approach that we believe, or our data suggests and supports, could use to track vacant houses that are available in the city. Finally, we will go into our findings and analysis that helped us curate a next step for Maplewood.
Well, I'll talk about opportunities. First of all, this is like the problem. There is a deficit of affordable housing in Maplewood, and there's also homes that have been identified with code violation, which are candidate for reinvestment and redevelopment. There's also the availability, and the goal of Maplewood is to redevelop this into affordable housing and encourage more low-income communities in Maplewood. This will improve the neighborhood and also create a thriving neighborhood community. So there's also the availability of $350,000 urban funding that the council wants to use for housing redevelopment. In the spring of 2022,
you don't have to lean away.
in the spring of 2022, there's a group of Humphrey students that started this project, and towards the end of the spring, they came up with 3 key takeaways. The first one was they identified Maplewood to partner with a land trust organization. A land trust is a kind of community-controlled housing program whereby the land is rented or sold to a low-income household. Secondly, they identified the development of tracking system for Maplewood of the vacant housing. Thirdly, they also considered to leverage the urban funds for long-term funding for the housing.
Hi, everybody. Good to be with you tonight. I'm Kate Kunitz. Areas of focus. So our work with Jeff and Mike on the scope of this phase of the project led us to focus areas and to research questions. So first, Maplewood needs a more concrete, systematic way of identifying and tracking these properties. Thank you.
You want to move a little bit over that way too, so you're closer to the microphone.
That
That would
better?
be better.
You don't have to worry. At home, they can hear you fine. It's just not exactly.
The masses that are observing,
Yeah.
okay. Secondly, partnerships and funding. So from the outset, we know that Maplewood needs a partner at the table that can facilitate that land trust model as well as essentially all program administration. There's no housing program or staff at the city. And finally, you are interested in financing the program over the long term, as well as applying an equity lens and asking how can this program meet the needs of Maplewood's diverse community. A little bit about our methodology. So we started by completing a literature review and some deeper secondary research. We then conducted a series of semi-structured interviews with potential partners, funders, and related program managers. And then we came together as a team and synthesized our findings and developed an analysis framework and identified core recommendations for Maplewood to move forward. So now we're going to move into discussing our findings, and that includes going through tracking homes as well as findings around funding, partnerships, and equity.
So, as mentioned, one of the takeaways the spring group had was the importance of Maplewood being able to come to the table with a list of available vacant homes in the city. So when we furthered our research, we came to the conclusion from data and research that it was important for Maplewood to obtain this information from agencies that were already collecting it. So, for example, a good starting place that Maplewood used was code violations. And from interviews, it was very clear that code violations are a good place to start. However, there are a lot of code violations, and so Maplewood might find it beneficial to focus on a few to kind of narrow the list down. From there are a couple other resources that Maplewood can look at. That includes houses that fall under tax forfeiture and also water records. Ramsey County has a list of homes that are vacant now because of tax forfeiture. St. Paul Regional Water Service, which is Maplewood's water supplier, also tracks this information through their water usage. So when I was speaking to a supervisor over there, I asked them about, do they have a list? And they do. They can generate a report of houses that are no longer having water connection, therefore suggesting that they are in fact vacant. So I asked them to pull a list to kind of see what that might look like, and I asked them to pull 2017 to 2022. I asked for the specific time period because their policy for disconnecting water changed a little bit during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was important to keep that in mind. And so with this kind of 5-year, with a 3-year pre-pandemic buffer, if you will, they generated a list of about 200 houses that were currently vacant. So from our research, we believe, and our data supports this, that using these 3 different resources, Maple would be able to come to the table with a pretty accurate and sufficient list of houses to work with. Next, we will go into our funding findings.
So, for this kind of program that Maplewood envisions, sustainable or long-term funding, the research shows, comes from applying for cyclical funding opportunities repeatedly. So it's a little bit of a misnomer generally to say that there's long-term sustainable funding. But what Maplewood can do is apply for those cyclical funding opportunities and build that relationship and knowledge base with funders. So that includes key state and county partners, and really demonstrating some shared vision and goals, finding a partner with capacity and experience to help you design and implement a program that can grow over time. And really, you're looking for partners that can leverage Maple's initial investment rather than spend it down. So being able to take the premise to a broader funder community and connect to further dollars. And that could include community organizations or foundations or potentially public-private partnerships. I did mention aligning goals with funding sources. 2 of the key funding sources that you might remember from the spring project, we picked back up where they left off on this. The Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has an annual process for their Community Homeownership Impact Fund. It's a late spring application for a summer grant award, and that is for housing programs across the state, and it awards quite a bit of funding, and they're looking primarily for 3 things in applications. So first would be organizational capacity, experience doing similar work, or a partner at the table that has experience doing similar work. If you were doing a partnership model, they would want to see documentation of that partnership with an experienced partner going into the contracting process. So at the very least, a memo of understanding. Second would be project feasibility, the likelihood of success that you can design and deliver a program within a 20-month contracting cycle. And then third, community needs. So for a rehab program like you envision, they need to know what gap it fills within the community that isn't met by other programs. Ramsey County Housing Redevelopment Authority is your other big partner. Ramsey invests quite a bit in housing in the county and would actively partner with a city like Maplewood. They are currently undergoing program renovation. They are extremely focused going forward on equity and specifically serving those that have suffered wealth extraction historically. And that could include BIPOC communities, first-time homeowners, first-generation homeowners. They also have homeowner assistance and affordability programs, and they're really focused on minimal repayments, so primarily grants and forgivable loans. Cities that are seeking funding via their RFPs next year would need to show alignment to those goals.
Get this right. All right. Good evening. Good evening, council members. Good evening, Mayor. My name is Guy Bowling. As she said earlier, MPA student with the Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs. Hopefully when this class is over, I'll have my master's degree and we'll be all good. Because really get on to the summer. But with that being said, what you will hear throughout this presentation, you'll hear a lot about partnerships. Partnerships. But I know in working in the field of family support for a long time, partnerships are so critical, but they can also be, excuse my French, to damn the ships, the partnerships, right? And so what we've learned is through what we've already presented through what we focused on as far as vacant housing, what we focused on funding, now partnerships is going to be critical to making this housing program successful. And so with that being said, we're going to also have my colleague, Abby, talk a little bit about equity as it relates to these partnerships. So just want to lead you to some of the findings that we came up with. And some of the things that we came up with is partnerships should include identifying elite agencies with experienced practitioners. Experienced practitioners will always recommend developing a clear written agreement between the lead agency administering the program partnership. You have to have a lead agency leading something like this. Also, too, the second thing is the top goal of the rehabilitation program should include the transformation of housing. Why? Because transformation of housing into a redemptive force for residents, owners, contractors, vendors, individuals and businesses that can benefit from the population being served. They all can. That's why the partnerships are so critical. And the third thing we realized is that collaborative partnerships for the rehabilitation program should align their focus on combined resources. Why is that? Because the combined resources of public, private, grassroots community organizations, and faith sectors to transform vacant, condemned, or underutilized properties and vacant lots into quality, attainable places to live for low to moderate income households. That's why we believe that needs to be so critical. And then the other thing that we realized in terms of our findings is that defining the rehabilitation program collaborative partnerships vision, mission, and purpose. Why? Strong partnerships can contribute to positive and lasting change for low-income residents facing home ownership barriers. But the other thing is we know is the resources of all these pieces of information, we know that understanding what it means to be a partner is critical. It's critical. Why? We define a relationship in the nonprofit, we define a partner as a relationship in which a nonprofit organization, government entity, corporate sponsor, and or other partners joining forces to meet a common goal on the basis of their shared values. And the last thing I'll say up here on the last bullet is build relationships and establish rapport with program recipients. Going back to the community, talking to the people, because what we know is the quality of low-income residents' interactions with practitioners makes a difference. When they feel valued, inclusive, and receive services or support to enhance their knowledge and skills regarding home ownership, tailored to their needs and goals, they are more likely to engage and achieve rehabilitation program goals. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to my next slide, my colleague.
Thank you. I will introduce myself now. My name is Abdi. This is my final year of MPA program. I'll be talking about equity and to support our case for community land trust models. I was looking from equity perspective. Community land trusts avoid and prevent displacement and gentrification. In private partners and private investors, what they usually look for is low-income areas, and they take over and do gentrification. So community land trusts prevent and they combat such gentrification displacement. Secondly, community land trusts ensure community are part of the decision making, because most of these organizations, they have a public being part of their board and decision making bodies. So they give power and leadership to the community. So whatever decision that comes out of that will be something the community will be accepted. Thirdly, they create wealth because most of community land trust organizations, they initially provide down payment for first home buyers of 80% or less AMI. So this is a very critical point of someone who is starting to own a home. And that's why we recommended in our findings. Community land trust also brings stewardship. They start the relationship on the onset of the program, but that relationship will continue even after the person exited from the home ownership. So that is also like they ensure the community has a lot of support and the stewardship. They do the engagement work through education, financial literacy, and all that. And the first mortgage, so we'll go to the next slide. On top of the community land trust, there are also a few findings that Maplewood can benefit from. This include Ramsey County has a down payment assistance program for first home buyers. They provide 25% of the total home price without repayment or any strings attached. They don't look at credit, which is something we found has been very long time barrier for community of colors. This is an opportunity and existing resource that Maplewood can consider in this program. There's also deferred unforgivable loans that Ramsey County has recently started for critical home repairs. This will prevent homes to go into unfixable point whereby people have to live away from their homes. So this is something we encourage also in our findings that Maplewood can benefit from and encourage their residents to participate. Also, the Home Advisors Program. A lot of community of colors, a lot of immigrants are recently moving to Maplewood. They have language barrier, education barrier. Home Advisors Program will help them navigate through the system in the application process, intake processes, and also finding support and connecting to resources available. This will be what other peer Ramsey County suburban cities are applying, and we thought will benefit Maplewood as well. Finally, some cities have established down payment and foreclosure diversion programs. They have an alternative way to resolve when a lender is at the point of closing a house because the owner is not able to meet the needed payment. There could be an alternative whereby the city has an arrangement to clear off the down payment, and that will prevent people from exiting their home ownership. Also, the city of Maplewood can apply a subsidized tax system to prevent cost burden. A lot of community of colors are paying housing more than 30%. Once someone is paying more than 30% of their income, they go into cost burden. And that might push them away from owning a home or at some point make them exit from a house. So finally, we're going to a peer city in Ramsey County, which is Roseville. Roseville uses a community land trust program in the housing redevelopment sector. And they have a very successful program as far as what we have found out and the interviews we conducted. What they use is that they purchase houses below 300,000. They also spend the house of like not more than 80,000 on the house, and then the rest of the resources and the support needed will be taken over by the community land trust, where they currently worked with Randall Community Land Trust and Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, which are both very active in Ramsey County and Twin Cities area. Also, Roseville has the Neighborhood Enhancement Program, which is a way of proactively tracking the homes that are with codes. Every year, they go around and see about 4,600 homes. And once they find out this code and a violation in their system, they pair with a staff that will visit them, consult with the homeowners, find out where the level of needs are, what are the barriers that they're currently encountering, and then the city gives 21 days to fix. If that will not be met, they will start like a kind of proactive abatement program whereby the city takes over the renovation and the improvement, and then the money will be repaid at some point. Roseville also uses a third-party organizations like Center for Energy and Environment that does most of their programs. That prevents the city from any liability or with information, and these are contracted agencies that will be close to the community. Since we found that some communities might be very bad nervous to work directly with the local government agencies and government institutions, nonprofit organization we found was a better option to be close to the community, build that relationship, and implement programming. I'll pass over to my colleague, Guy.
I don't have a lot more to say about that, but I think you covered it quite eloquently. But what I would say is this is more anecdotal information in terms of what we learned about when we talked with the city of Roseville. And what they said to us, this is more quotes, it's more about got to be clear. If you're going to do something like this, you got to be clear about the mission and the scope of your work. You can't do everything, and you can't be able to address all the code violations. So be real specific on which ones you're going to prioritize and really focus on in terms of what your priority is. So that's one of the things that we learned in talking with them. The other thing is make sure when you're talking with partners that you're vetting them. I mean, you really clearly understanding what it is that they're bringing to the table, what is it that you actually need, and how do they fit actually into that. You may have to have multiple partners that's a part of this to address those multiple issues based on some of the different programs that you see up here that they're doing, and it's going to take more than just one, but you can start small and build from there. And the other thing we learned was don't duplicate what the county's already doing. Don't do that. So if you're going to be unique in your efforts to try to address that issue, don't do what the county's already doing. And so some of you may already know that. I see you're smiling, but don't try to do the same thing that they're already doing. So don't duplicate that. And the other thing is make sure that you have your target audience clearly defined, because you're not going to be able to help every single person, but you need to have resources to be able to either refer them out or address what your priority is. And so making sure that you have your target audience defined is only going to benefit you greatly. So that's the other piece I just wanted to add to it. Thanks.
Okay, moving into our analysis. From the findings we shared, we hope we've demonstrated that funding, partnership, and equity, thank you, are intertwined. A strong partnership for Maplewood will be able to attract and leverage funding and additional partners to ensure the program can sustain over time. This partner must also share Maplewood's focus on equity considerations and be able to bring them to life. So we asked, what makes a good partner for Maplewood, and identified the following framework. Organizational capacity is that outermost ring, encompassing all the other measures. So that's where you're looking for someone with that track record of success that can develop a low-risk program and goals for you. Program administration, so all the various tasks associated. And then funding, so securing funding and potentially co-investing. Second ring there is program design, setting Maplewood up for success with co-design of this program. Being able to apply that multiple supports approach, understanding scalability for different properties and different needs. So everything may not be a full site control rehabilitation project, essentially. And that gets back to some of the different pieces that Abdi was discussing. And then also being able to bring that community land trust model to life. Next is relationships with contractors, vendors, nonprofits, and so on, and the ability to creatively leverage that investment within that network rather than spending it down. And community connection, knowledge, relationships, and that block-by-block insight within the city. And finally, at the core, we have mission alignment. That's the central piece of the partnership where you have inspirational vision, shared goals, and that equity focus.
Okay, so as mentioned, the Spring Group's research led them to suggest that Rondo Community Land Trust and Habitat for Humanity may be good potential partners for Maplewood's program. In our further research of both of these land trust models, we concluded that while they may differ in the technical aspects of operation, they share the fundamental aspects of what will make a good, efficient, and effective partner for Maplewood. So referring back to our ring of analysis, if you will, we'll start in the middle, and I'll quickly note that this is a little bit of an overview. Our final report will be a little bit more in-depth on these topics, but starting with mission alignment, both Rondo and Habitat for Humanity share their commitment in affordability, equity, and their commitment to community. Rondo, for example, their executive director has a visionary growth plan that has support from a broad community of funders, including the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. Habitat for Humanity, well, their way of operation is similar to the mission of this project, which is to acquire vacant land or premises and to build or renovate. They have noticed that in their projects, while community land trusts are one way that they work, they do other things, but they've noticed that a lot of their projects are using community land trust models, and that is because it is, in fact, a more equitable approach. Moving a little outwards of the ring towards relationships, both of these land trusts see the value in the commitment to community through collaboration. Rondo Community Land Trust has the capacity to convene many partners at the table, which would then help Maplewood leverage their ARPA funding. They also have several connections both within the residents and other nonprofit agencies. Habitat for Humanity, often they do operate as an individual entity, but they will partner with existing markets because they do see the importance in community presence and building relationships. Moving outwards to program design. Both of these land trusts offer flexibility, which is really a crucial aspect. Rondo offers multiple programs that can be applied based on what would be most effective for Maplewood, which you'll kind of find as you develop your program goals. And Habitat for Humanity, again, as I mentioned, they operate individually a lot, but they are interested in partnerships, as you saw with the case study in Roseville. In addition to working with the Rondo Community Land Trust, they also have worked with the City of Lakes. In short, if a city has a land trust that they want to work with, Habitat is more than happy to because of the importance it might mean for the community. Finally, we'll go to that outer ring of organizational capacity. Both of these land trusts currently have several projects underway. Right now, Rondo is on a 3-year rapid growth trajectory, and they have several projects in varying stages across the city. Habitat for Humanity, similarly, has several undergoing projects that are at different stages across the metro. So, our ultimate recommendations. We have 2 high-level recommendations for you. One is exploring a potential partnership with either or both Rondo Community Land Trust or Habitat for Humanity. And the second is to begin your program design. You'll want to start your conversations with both to decide if you want a leading agency, if you're interested in exploring a collaboration between the two. From there, you'll be able to secure funding and also discuss implementation. In addition, you're going to want to open the lines of communication with Ramsey along with the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. At this point, you'll want to kind of have your shared goals develop and also technical assistance to set you up for success. And finally, when it comes to program design, our research has shown that property assessment and homeowner connections are as important as site control and rehabilitation. At this point, we thank you for your time this evening, and we will open the floor with any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I see that there is a question up here. We have a light system, and we have screens up here, so we have a question from Councilmember Knudsen. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you very much. I have a series of them. I'll just say at the onset, as I coach graduate students at the Carlson Business School, one thing you all have in common is you guys scare the heck out of me how smart you are. But, well, let's see. Just wondering, who capitalizes the Community Land Trust? Because I was just doing some back of the envelope stuff, sorry, Ellie. But But to say we have 50 homes that we're working on and say the market value is 300,000, you're talking $15 million. So how are these things capitalized?
That's a great question. Does anyone want to field this one? Okay.
I can talk a little bit about it. We're not housing policy experts by any means, so I'll start there. But community land trusts, so there are, I believe, 12 in Minnesota. The oldest is Rondo Community Land Trust. It's about 30 years old. And they are capitalized in different ways, but generally speaking, it's those partnerships that we talk about. So with the housing agencies, with different foundations potentially, and then also building up that fund internally.
So do the land trusts then essentially own the real estate? Is that how
They
it
take
works?
ownership, yep, so they're in,
Okay.
I think, 99-year leases, which then can be extended to
So
perpetuity.
do people own or rent in these land trusts?
They own the home that's on the land.
Okay, so it's like a land lease. I mean,
So
it's like
people essentially
a ground
have-
lease, which is
it's-
pretty typical
yeah,
in commercial
yep.
kind of things. Okay. I got,
Go ahead.
oh, okay. Page. Okay, so, well, you answered the question of, the investment is through grants and other opportunities. I suppose some is bank funded too, I would imagine.
Yeah, so they also have a really good network of lending partners that is really important both for mortgages for people to have trusted partners that understand the model and can come to the table in that way, but then also, yes.
So there's got to be then architects and builders and, or is that a Habitat role, or how does that work?
They have, so Rondo and Habitat both have a lot of different relationships that they contract with in terms of contractors and architects and developers.
So does it end up kind of like a co-op when it's done, do you think? Or is there tendencies of a cooperative kind of thing?
Somewhat.
Do-
Part of what we gathered from the interviews that we did was that it's really important to know who your lead agency is so that there is that clear contracting in place. But
So
it does
the-
end up being a lot of partners at the table.
The person that's in the home, do they build equity or appreciation? How does that work?
25% of the equity goes to the homeowner in the land trust model,
Oh. And who?
generally.
How much is it then rents and payments and so forth are adjusted based on capacity or capability, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's where you get different affordability models, but generally speaking, it's adjusted, yeah.
Wow.
So
Thank
that's
you.
where different, like Ramsey County comes to the table with some of those other programs that sort of fill in gaps for people.
No, I'm very excited about this. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, council members? I don't see any questions from the council. I just want to say thank you very much. This has been really important to help us kind of set the boundaries on what it is that we're trying to do. We certainly have the passion for creating these kinds of opportunities for people in our community. And so you have kind of laid the groundwork for us and really set some parameters for us. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed hearing from you.
We did. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate the opportunity.
You bet.
This is one of the nicest council member facilities I've ever been in, so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Council members, we have gone through our agenda for tonight. For our workshop, we are going to adjourn, and then let's take 10 minutes. So we will convene at, let's do shortly after 7:10, okay?